Hello, this is Professor Scott Applegate. Welcome to PSCS 6248, Introduction to Cyber Conflict. This is Unit 6, Lesson 1, State Actors in Cyber Conflict. Agenda. In this lesson, we will introduce the topic of state actors in cyber conflict. We will then explore a half-dozen case studies focused on cyber incidents involving state actors or their proxies. Introduction. We will begin our exploration of state actors in cyber conflict in a period of time Jay Healy calls militarization. During this period of time, national militaries and intelligence organizations came to the forefront as major players in the cyber domain. During this period, we see the rise of Chinese cyber espionage, wherein China seemed to embrace the theft of military, economic, and commercial information as a stratagem to accelerate its technological development and narrow the gap between China and its Western competitors. Espionage campaigns such as Titan, Rain, and GHOSTNET headlined the news, while China stoically denied any wrongdoing. During this time frame, we also see the development of the first true purpose-built cyber weapons. Complex modular targeted malware such as STUXNET and DUQU are discovered by cybersecurity teams, being used for both espionage and sabotage. Throughout this period, we see a tendency for covert or clandestine activity, where states purposely cover their tracks or even make use of non-state actors as proxies to achieve their objectives. These activities transform the cyberspace domain and draw the international community into a new paradigm where cyberspace is declared a new domain of conflict between states. Over the last 15 years, there have been many cyber incidents involving state actors. This listing just represents a small portion of the overall activity, ranging from distributed denial of service attacks and cyber espionage to kinetic cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. We have seen several cyberspace operations conducted in conjunction with military operations such as Operation Orchard or the Georgia cyber conflict. A number of states have made use of patriotic hackers as proxies to conduct attacks against other states without the possible blowback that could occur from conducting the attacks directly. What is clear from this activity is that the states have embraced cyber activities as a new capability to further their national interests. The Center for Security and International Studies, CSIS, has kept a running list of significant cyber incidents since 2006, mainly focusing on cyber attacks on government agencies, defense and high-tech companies, or economic crimes with losses of more than $1 million. This listing is a great resource, and you will find the location in the references for this presentation. CSIS also tracks attacks presumed to be conducted by nation-states. As you can see from this chart, the vast majority of state-sponsored attacks originate from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, India, and the United States. Additionally, you can see from this data that the United States is disproportionately targeted by means of cyber espionage and cyber warfare attacks. This chart excludes cybercrime information. The Estonian cyber conflict. Sometimes inaccurately called the First Cyber War, the Estonian cyber conflict primarily took place from 27 April to 18 May 2007, although there were residual cyber attacks that continued for the next several months. Estonia was uniquely vulnerable to the campaign of cyber attacks that took place, as it was one of the most wired countries in the world at the time of the conflict. After breaking away from the Soviet Union and Russia, Estonia had heavily embraced information technology, implementing its use for everything from online voting to internet banking. The Estonian internet infrastructure was subjected to a series of distributed denial of service attacks, web defacements, email floods, and DNS server attacks. The conflict was noteworthy not just for its geopolitical implications. It also shed light on the organizational aspects of cybersecurity and the role of the civilian global technical community to reestablish functionality of the internet after an attack. These attacks hallmark the first use of the internet as a coercive instrument of political power by one state against another. What is particularly interesting about this conflict is that while there is suspicion and some evidence that Russia covertly sponsored the attack, it was largely led and executed by patriotic hackers. The attacks were orchestrated on Russian-language internet forums where the organizers posted target sets, tools, and even tracked when targets went down throughout the conflict. Build up to the conflict. At the time of the attacks, Estonia was entrenched in a domestic conflict between the newly elected government and its support on the one side, and an ideologically motivated minority of predominantly ethnic Russians on the other. As a result, the long-standing conflict with Estonia's former occupying power, Russia, had culminated in heated diplomatic exchanges between Russia and Estonia. In January 2007, the Estonian government decided to move a World War II monument from the center of Tallinn to a military cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Erected in 1947, the statue depicted an unnamed soldier wearing the uniform of the Red Army. The statue was intended to honor the 11 million Red Army soldiers who had died in the war, but many Estonians saw it as a symbol of the post-war suppression of Estonian independence. After 1991, when Estonia regained its sovereignty, the statue became a point of political conflict in Estonian domestic political affairs. During the months preceding the movement of the statue, Russia expressed its displeasure at the pending Estonian action. The Russia Upper House filed a resolution demanding that their Estonian parliamentary peers prevent the movement of the statue, and Russian Vice Prime Minister Sergei Ivanov made a public plea to boycott Estonian goods and services. On the 27th of April 2007, Estonia removed the statue from the center of Tallinn. The streets were subsequently filled with ethnic Russian protesters. Russian President Vladimir Putin fiercely criticized the Estonian decision, and later that evening, the first signs of the cyber attacks appeared on the monitoring screen of Estonian IT operators. Early attacks. Starting at around 10 p.m., Estonian organizations faced several kinds of attacks on their servers, which were used for email, web pages, domain name resolution, and other internet services. Systems slackened or stalled under the unusually high data traffic. Internet sites suffered from web defacements. Email inboxes were filled with tons of spam and phishing email. Political institutions were the early targets of the attack. Estonian Prime Minister Andris Ansip and other leading politicians were spammed. The email services of the Estonian parliament had to be temporarily shut down as they were no longer able to handle the unusual data payloads. Internet traffic exceeded average day peak loads by a factor of 10, resulting in malfunctions or non-availability of critical services. New sites were hit with distributed denial-of-service attacks and were forced to close foreign access to their networks, limiting Estonia's chances to make their voice heard internationally. The Estonian government was the most notable among the institutions affected. Its website, valitsus.ee, was not available for 8 consecutive days. These early attacks relied on synchronized human actions through Russian message boards and forums to control the attacks. Estonian response. The attacks did not come as a complete surprise to the Estonian security community. They had seen it coming. When there are riots in the streets, they will eventually go cyber, was the assessment shared in many of the Estonian security community. Additionally, Estonian and international internet security communities had seen the call to arms on Russian language message boards, looking for comrades to help initiate the DDoS attack against the pillars of Estonian society. The Estonian cybersecurity community began mitigating the attacks within 4 hours. Key government websites were moved to well-defended servers scaled to handle excessive internet traffic. What started as an operational IT problem, DDoS attacks are almost daily business for the IT security community, became a national security situation 3 hours later when the Estonian Minister of Defense, Jaak Aaviksoo, announced at 1 a.m. that we are under cyber attack. Progression of the attack. In the second and main phase of the attack, the coordination no longer depended on forum communications. Instead, attack coordination was mostly delegated to command and control servers of real botnets. This phase started on 30 April and lasted until 18 May. It ran in 4 waves of different intensities, focusing on different targets and using different attack techniques. The first wave on 4 May included DDoS attacks on websites and DNS systems. Apart from that, the first week of May was relatively calm. The second wave took place on the 9th through the 11th of May and included DDoS attacks against government websites and financial services. The third wave on the 15th of May included botnet-based DDoS attacks against government websites and financial industries. The fourth wave again consisted of attacks against government websites and banks. Among the most significant attacks during this phase were attacks on the Hansa Bank that cost the bank over $1 million in lost revenue and damages. Botnet attacks. A botnet is a group of computers connected in a coordinated fashion for malicious purposes. Each computer in a botnet is called a bot. These bots form a network of compromised computers, which is controlled by a third party, sometimes called a bot herder, and is used to transmit malware or spam, or to launch other attacks such as distributed denial of service attacks. Bot herders will usually control a botnet through a command and control or C2 server. This server is usually a compromised system which the bot herder will issue commands to, often through a series of other compromised systems to make attribution difficult. Originally, botnets were created as a tool with valid purposes in Internet Chat Relay (IRC) channels. Eventually, hackers exploited the vulnerabilities in IRC networks and developed bots to perform malicious activities such as password theft, keystroke logging, etc. An attacker will often target computers not safeguarded with firewalls or antivirus software. A botnet manipulator can get control of a computer in a variety of ways, but most frequently does so via viruses or worms. Botnets are significant because they have become tools of both hackers and organized crimes to perform illegal activities online. For example, hackers use botnets to launch coordinated denial of service attacks, while organized crime uses botnets as a way to spam or send a phishing attack that is used for identity theft. International collaboration. Once the attacks became botnet-based during the second phase of the attacks, international collaboration became necessary. Estonian internet security experts collaborated with the global internet security operations community and CERTs in other countries, mainly Finland, Germany, and Slovenia. CERT Estonia, drowning in information and work during the response efforts and operating at the edge of, if not beyond its capabilities, welcomed the help offered by their Finnish colleagues. CERT Finland analyzed, processed, and then disseminated attack telemetry data to the operators of those internet segments from which some of the attacks possibly originated. The international collaboration included other contributors in addition to these distinct national CERTs. National companies, security appliance and hardware vendors, law enforcement, and non-profit internet security organizations, and a number of individual ICT security professionals from Estonia, Russia, and other places around the world provided additional assistance. These participants provided appliances, hardware, and more bandwidth, filtered malevolent traffic, and provided information necessary to understand the scope, nature, and technical details of the ongoing attacks. Mitigating measures. In order to mitigate the large DDoS attacks, Estonian defenders increased the capacity of Estonian internet services and its underlying architecture, upscaling servers, offering a temporary stripped-down website, granting or denying access to the website to certain ranges of IP addresses, increasing bandwidth between targets and their ISPs or backbones, and routing DDoS traffic to sinkholes allowed Estonia to keep web services online. Filtering mechanisms were added to the Estonian internet structure to drop malicious packets before they could reach their intended destinations. Additionally, Estonian defenders began blocking access and dropping traffic to servers from anything outside Estonia. This made Estonian systems unavailable from abroad, but restored critical services to Estonian users inside their country. Access abroad was restored once the majority of the malicious attacks decreased in volume. Impact. Despite press coverage and political attention, overall impacts of the attacks were minimal. The influx of DDoS packets had temporary consequences on the quality and availability of Estonian web services. Email and web services of some organizations were partly unavailable or functioned at reduced capabilities. Only a few critical online services, such as banks, were affected for clients inside Estonia. Many non-critical services, government websites and news sites for example, suffered long-term service outages. As one would expect from non-physical attacks, the information technology structure of the country was left undamaged. There was no apparent attempt to actually target the national critical infrastructure other than internet resources. No comprehensive calculation of the overall financial consequences has ever been written, largely because of the absence of overall monitoring of the Estonian internet system in 2007. Aftermath. Overall, while the attack garnered substantial international media attention, if it was intended to punish or disable Estonia, it was largely a failure. To the contrary, Estonia profited from a number of intangible and political gains due to the attack. The attacks and respective response turned a little-known Baltic state into a household brand for all matters cybersecurity and likely helped secure the hosting of the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence and the EU Agency for Large-Scale IT Systems into Estonia. The attack also secured an increased commitment from NATO and the European Union, thereby advancing Estonia's strategic foreign policy goal of strengthening integration into Western institutions. A lesson learned is that although cyber attacks can be clearly used as an instrument of power to influence a state's domestic politics, it must clearly be done with care, as an effort could potentially have the opposite result hoped for by its originators. In the case of Estonian cyber conflict, the attacks ended up being more beneficial than punitive to Estonia and pushed the country much more rapidly into the Western sphere of influence, which is clearly antithetical to Russian desires. Russo-Georgian War. The Georgian cyber conflict took place in conjunction with the Russo-Georgian War of 2008, and like the Estonian cyber conflict, was largely orchestrated and executed by Russian patriotic hackers. Traditional Russian forces invaded Georgia while almost simultaneously, Russian patriotic hackers conducted distributed denial-of-service attacks and web defacements. This conflict represents the first time we have seen traditional kinetic military operations carried out in conjunction with a strong offensive cyber component. Cyber components of the attack mostly focused on denial and degradation of Georgian communication systems, which limited Georgia's ability to issue instructions to civilian populations or communicate with the outside world. This allowed Russia to largely shape the public narrative on the international stage. Unlike the Estonian cyber attacks, some efforts in the Georgian cyber conflict also focused on the exfiltration of military and police data from Georgian networks. This is something we would expect to see from intelligence organizations, not patriotic hackers. Build up to the conflict. Russia and Georgia share a long history of differences that reach back to the annexation of Georgia to Russia in the 19th century and to the beginning of the Soviet Union in the early 20th century. These differences have been brewing ever since and have resulted in violent ethnic clashes. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, Georgia became independent, like many former Soviet satellite countries. Many ethnic regions of Georgia, such as Abkhazia or South Ossetia, were also demanding autonomy, which seemed reasonable at first, but as demands escalated and turned confrontational, pushed the limits of what the Georgian government was willing to tolerate. Russia supported many of these ethnic minorities for a number of politically advantageous reasons. Before 2008, Russia tried to influence the Georgian economy by blocking trade and other means of economic pressure. Russia stood up on the sides of minorities and supported them, mostly due to a 1992 law that allowed former Soviet Union citizens to apply for Russian citizenship. Many of the people in the regions neighboring Russia had taken advantage of this law, which made Russia a key player in the discourse between parties. To further ensure its involvement, Russia also provided financial aid to many of these regions. As tensions rose, Georgian President Saakashvili began to rapidly build up Georgian military capabilities, which in turn increased distrust among the regional factions. As signs of a pending conflict rose, Russia spent the summer of 2008 conducting a series of military exercises on the Georgian border as a show of force. These exercises practiced scenarios which included responding to Georgian aggression in South Ossetia. These actions suggested that Moscow was intentionally showing force to maintain their traditional regional dominance. In the months leading up to the Georgian incursion, Georgia experienced violent exchanges with South Ossetian militias. Finally, on the evening of 7 August 2008, Georgian forces entered the South Ossetian capital and several villages, supposedly in response to a bombardment by South Ossetian forces that were in violation of a previously established ceasefire agreement. On 8 August, Russia responded by invading Georgia with a superior military force because they saw the Georgian actions as a threat. This was the first time that Moscow had deployed its military forces outside of its borders since the war with Afghanistan ended in 1989. Cyber attack methodology. Starting on 7 August 2008, roughly 8 hours before Russian troops rolled across the border, Georgia was targeted by intensive and increasing cyber attacks against government websites and communications infrastructure. The attacks largely focused on controlling the flow of information and influencing people's perceptions. Hackers utilized sophisticated DDoS attacks that incorporated SQL injections and cross-site scripting. The most important result of these attacks was the essential freeze imposed on the Georgian government's ability to use the internet to issue any communications to their populations or to the outside world. The attacks also featured an information exfiltration component designed to steal and accumulate military and political intelligence from the Georgian networks. Evidence suggests coordination for the attacks began weeks in advance. There appear to have been preparatory and reconnaissance attacks in July when hackers used DDoS attacks against the Georgian president's website on July 19th, overloading and taking down the site. At that time, little attention was paid to this attack as the Georgian president downplayed the significance of the event. Similar to the Estonian cyber conflict, patriotic hackers involved in the Georgia cyber conflict used Russian-language hacker forums to distribute denial-of-service tools and target sets. Hackers also registered new domains to serve as command and control platforms for the attack. StopGeorgia.ru maintained a list of potential targets including many government institutions. In addition to DDoS attacks, numerous websites were defaced as well. Hackers posted collages that compared Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili with Adolf Hitler. Persistent cyber attacks on the banking system forced Georgia banks to shut down electronic services and connections to foreign banks. This paralyzed Georgian payment systems and left some Georgians without access to money. Due to limited or zero access to financial means, many Georgians could not buy anything in stores. This in turn significantly decreased demand for goods during this time frame. Georgian defensive efforts. Georgia was less vulnerable than Estonia to these types of cyber attacks simply because it was much less reliant on the internet than its Baltic cousin. Georgia's defensive capabilities were limited and spread thin. Georgia initially attempted to simply filter all traffic from Russia. However, hackers bypassed this filtering quickly by moving their attacks to servers in other countries. Georgia then contacted Estonian officials in order to leverage their expertise and experience from the 2007 Estonian cyber attacks. Georgia's most effective defensive countermeasures were to transfer websites to servers in other countries. For example, the Georgian president's website was transferred to Google's blog servers in California. Interestingly, Russian patriotic hackers continued to attempt to attack the president's website, even after it was effectively moved to the U.S., leading some to discuss the implications of cyber attacks against the U.S.-based systems in the midst of a conflict in which the U.S. was not playing a role. It is also notable that Georgia did not seek permission from the U.S. government to move its beleaguered website to a U.S. system. Other websites were moved to servers in Estonia, Poland, and Atlanta, Georgia. Origins of the attacks. Though there are still a few pieces missing that would establish a concrete connection between these cyber attacks and the Russian government and military, the coincidence of a coordinated attack from the Russian ground forces and Russian patriotic hackers seems far from random. One security researcher noted that either this was one of the biggest coincidences in history or there was some form of collaboration. The majority of the cyber attacks spanned several weeks and coincided with attacks by Russian ground forces. Indeed, the cyber attack started mere hours before the first Russian artillery shells were lobbed across the border. The majority of attacks originated from inside the Russian Federation, with evidence pointing to several groups being involved. These included patriotic hackers from inside the Russian Federation and Russian sympathizers in other countries. The DDoS attacks and botnets used were attributed to a Russian cyber crime game known as the Russian Business Network, or RBN. The RBN is purportedly led by the nephew of a well-connected Russian politician, and intelligence estimates have suggested that the Russian government has tolerated the RBN in return for its use in some politically motivated activities, such as the cyber attacks in Georgia and Azerbaijan in 2008. Many of the tools and attack commands used by attackers in the Georgia cyber conflict have been attributed to the RBN by security researchers. Another group that is loosely associated with both the Estonian and Georgia attacks is the Nashi. The Nashi is a political youth movement in Russia, which Western critics have compared to the Soviet Komsomol or the Hitler Youth. Its creation was encouraged by senior figures in the Russian presidential administration, and it is labeled as a governmental organized non-governmental organization. By late 2007, the Nashi had grown in size to some 120,000 members aged between 17 and 25. In March 2009, it was reported that a Nashi commissar and some associates claimed they had launched the DDoS attack on Estonia in May 2007. The Nashi also held demonstrations outside the Estonian embassy in Moscow during the Estonian cyber conflict to protest the movement of the Soviet-era statue. There is evidence that the Nashi also participated in the Georgia cyber attacks. In 2012, the Nashi dissolved and formed the Russian Smart Party. Aftermath. The Russo-Georgian War and accompanying cyber conflict demonstrated the potential effects that the use of unofficial cyber militias can have during a greater conflict. These efforts disrupted lines of communication, disrupted Georgian messaging efforts, and assisted Russia in controlling the public narrative internationally. It intensified public fear in Georgia and shielded Russian for attribution and international recriminations. Lessons learned from both the Estonian and Georgia cyber conflicts have shaped Russian doctrine and undoubtedly led to the establishment of Russia's information confrontation doctrine and strong integration of cyber operations that we see demonstrated in Russian capabilities today. BUCKSHOT YANKEE. In the summer of 2008, an infected thumb drive was inserted into a U.S. military laptop on a base in the Middle East. The technically advanced worm stored on the thumb drive was able to spread to other systems and infect other thumb drives, which careless users then transferred from unclassified to classified systems. The malware attempted to beacon home, over the internet, for further instructions, alerting cybersecurity personnel to the problem. This series of events led to one of the only publicly known cases of U.S. classified networks being breached. While this event led to concern among high-level policymakers and heralded large changes in how the U.S. military would tackle these kinds of challenges, it is worth keeping in mind that it was not the sophistication of the worm, but rather the poor security practices by military personnel that led to the infection of the U.S. military's air-gapped classified networks. Had users simply followed existing policies at the time and not transferred data between classified and unclassified networks using thumb drives, the infection never would have reached the military's classified networks. A known threat. The worm, known as Agent BTC, was circulated months before the BUCKSHOT YANKEE incident on the internet. Agent BTC was a Trojan variant of the earlier Silly FTC worm. It was first discovered by F-Secure, a Finnish cybersecurity firm. The worm only became a threat to military networks in June of 2008 when it was first identified on a NATO computer. It took 4 months before it was discovered on DoD systems, where the response was rapid and brief to the highest levels of government. New variants of Agent BTC were still present on U.S. military networks as late as June of 2011. Attribution. Almost from the beginning, U.S. officials suspected that Russia's spy service created Agent BTC to steal military secrets. However, the military has not publicly stated this, only going so far as to attribute the worm, in the words of former Undersecretary of Defense William Lynn, to a foreign intelligence agency. A Russian origin was suggested by some of the known facts about the case, and an interview by Wired magazine stated that the Russians had previously used Agent BTC malware. Russia, for its part, was quick to deny responsibility and called the accusations groundless and irresponsible. There is also contradictory evidence that suggests Agent BTC, or at least the BUCKSHOT YANKEE intrusion, was not the work of the Russian Federation. Security researcher Jeff Carr has noted indicators that Agent BTC was created in China, but states that this does not exclude Russia as the possible instigator. Additionally, the antivirus company Symantec labeled the Silly FTC worm that Agent BTC was based on as a very low security risk in 2007. Based on this analysis, some experts questioned that an intelligence agency, let alone a Russian intelligence agency, would utilize such an unsophisticated tool. At this time, Russian use of cyber espionage was characterized as highly sophisticated and very difficult to detect. This seems at odds with the relatively unsophisticated and very easy to detect agent BTZ. Technical effect. Depending on whose analysis you rely on, agent BTZ appears to have been either an attempt at cyber espionage or an example of poor cybersecurity practices leading to a malware infection on multiple networks. Agent BTC infected the DoD's unclassified NIPRNet and additionally infected two of its classified networks, SIPRNet and JWIX. These classified networks are supposedly air-gapped, but it is likely that these classified networks were infected by a careless user who utilized thumb drives to move data across multiple networks, a practice which was against regulation and policy at this point in time. Agent BTZ relied on the auto-run feature of the Windows operating system. Another policy which would have prevented its spread would have been to simply disable the auto-run feature on the operating systems. Mitigating efforts. One of the key features to detecting and mitigating Agent BTZ was its attempts to beacon out to request further instructions from the Internet. This feature was what led to the identification of the worm by the NSA's Advanced Network Operations, or ANO team, as they noted the attempts of the worm to beacon out on U.S. classified networks. The air-gapped nature of these networks of course prevented Agent BTZ from reaching a command and control server, much less exfiltrating data. In order to mitigate the spread of the worm across DoD networks, ANO created its own update server for Agent BTZ and instructed the malware to go into slumber mode by responding to its beacons. The U.S. military subsequently banned thumb drives and virtually all removable media from use on its networks, and that ban largely remains in place to this day with very limited exceptions. Implications. BUCKSHOT YANKEE led directly to the integration of the NSA into military operations. The military realized that even with its Joint Task Force on Global Network Operations, or JTF-GNO, it simply did not have the technical capabilities to deal with a widespread event of this nature. BUCKSHOT YANKEE has also been cited as the inspiration for the creation of U.S. Cyber Command as a sub-unified combatant command. The establishment of U.S. Cyber Command absorbed JTF-GNO and a number of other organizations focused on various aspects of cybersecurity and cyber operations, and put them all under the auspices of a single commander who is also dual-hatted as the director of the NSA. As of the recording of this lecture, it appears that the decision to elevate U.S. Cyber Command to a full functional combatant command is imminent. General Keith Alexander, the first commander of U.S. Cyber Command, also noted that BUCKSHOT YANKEE kicked off a broader cultural shift in the military in the context of the understanding of cyber by military commanders. Whether BUCKSHOT YANKEE was an example of an attempted cyber espionage or simply a case of poor cybersecurity, one fact is clear. This incident led to significant changes in how the U.S. military organized itself for both cybersecurity and cyber operations. Chinese cyber espionage. Over the last decade, cybersecurity has become an increasingly contentious issue in the bilateral relationship between the United States and the People's Republic of China. Washington and Beijing are both likely to see the other as a, if not the, major actor responsible for frustrating the pursuit of strategic interests in cyberspace. At the same time, the two countries are highly economically interdependent, and they continue to seek broader cooperation on a range of global and regional issues, such as containing the nuclear programs of Iran and North Korea. China has heavily embraced cyber warfare and cyber espionage in both their national and military strategies. Chinese military publications publicly discuss the imperative to maintain information dominance early in a conflict through attacks on command and control, transportation, communications, and logistics centers. As a result, China continually conducts reconnaissance and surveillance of U.S. government and military networks, and China is suspected of conducting penetrations of U.S. SCADA systems. China has also made clear use of cyber espionage to advance itself not just militarily, but also economically and politically. Cyber espionage is central to the effort to make the Chinese economy more technologically competitive. Chinese policymakers worry that the country is too dependent on foreign technology and desperately want to move the country into high-tech sectors. To do this, China has significantly ramped up research and development spending, but it has also relied on industrial espionage directed at high technology and advanced manufacturing companies. Chinese hackers have reportedly targeted the negotiation strategies and financial information of energy, banking, law, and other companies. It is this focus on the theft of intellectual property rather than traditional military and political espionage targets that has drawn the ire of the United States. China appears to be leveraging cyber espionage for economic, diplomatic, and military purposes. Examples of Chinese cyber espionage. Suspected cases of Chinese state-sponsored espionage over the last decade include well-known and publicized incidents such as Titan Rain, GHOSTNET, and Operation Shady Rat. In 2013, Mandiant published a damning investigative report which clearly linked units of the People's Liberation Army to economic espionage. It is important to note the dates on this list represents the dates these incidents were first reported to the public. Many of these events were long-term cyber espionage campaigns in operation for years before discovery. GHOSTNET. In June of 2008, Information Warfare Monitor identified a malware-based cyber espionage campaign which compromised systems in over 100 countries. This campaign relied on email messages containing Trojan viruses. The malware allowed the intruders to gain real-time control of infected systems. Intruders searched for and downloaded specific files and were able to covertly operate attached devices including microphones and webcams. Intruders used social media and webmail sites to coordinate the intrusion and direct compromised computers to free web hosting sites and command and control servers. Intrusions targeted the offices of the Dalai Lama, Tibetan exile centers, embassies, foreign ministries, and other government offices. It is this list of targets that pointed to a state actor rather than cyber criminals, as these systems offered little financial gain. The scale of the GHOSTNET intrusions is depicted on the map, with the size of the circles representing the number of compromised systems found in each country. This map depicts the 347 locations of the 1,295 compromised computers involved in the GHOSTNET campaign. Actors and methods. Chinese cyber espionage campaigns appear to originate from a combination of state-sponsored and organized crime groups. China appears to have a holistic approach to cyber espionage and cyber operations, leveraging military and state organizations, universities and research institutes, and patriotic hackers and organized crime. In recent years, as China's program has become more mature, we have seen a movement away from the use of patriotic hackers and organized crime groups, and in fact, China has begun to crack down on many of these organizations. Government and private security experts have identified between 12 and 20 groups responsible for the majority of the intrusions. Groups appear to be specialized, some being responsible for infiltrating networks and others in exfiltrating data. In public reporting, the intrusions are generally described as Advanced Persistent Threats, or APTs. On 18 February 2013, Mandiant released a report documenting evidence of cyber espionage by the People's Liberation Army. The report focused on the activities carried out by PLA Unit 61398 and identified several individuals by name. The annexes included live screen captures of cyber espionage actors at work compromising systems and exfiltrating data. China's official response was to deny everything spelled out in the report. Methodology. Overall, the methodology used by Chinese hackers to conduct cyber espionage is largely the same methodology used by hackers and penetration testers the world over. It tends to be more persistent than advanced, with actors taking their time to carefully establish multiple backdoors and ensure their ability to return to compromised networks repeatedly over a period of months and years. Chinese actors tend to rely on spear phishing, social engineering, Trojans, and rarely some zero-day exploits. As in standard hacker methodology, Chinese hackers identify their target and spend a good bit of time researching the target prior to an initial intrusion. This allows them to develop specific tools to attempt to compromise the organizations in question and develop highly targeted spear phishing attacks. Once an intrusion is successful, Hackers will attempt to expand their beachhead, gain access to additional systems, and obtain credentials which might help them either regain access if they are detected or gain access to other systems. They will generally deploy multiple backdoors in the network they compromise, some of which might remain dormant until needed. Finally, once they have strengthened their foothold on the compromised network sufficiently, they will begin to exfiltrate data, all while trying to remain undetected and cover their footprints on the compromised systems. Policy responses. For the most part, the Chinese government consistently denies it is behind the malicious cyber activity and claims accusers are trying to poison its bilateral relationship with the United States. China also notes that it is the largest victim of cyber attacks worldwide. The latter is probably true just due to the fact that China has a fifth of the world's population and a vast number of computers which become the victims of malware daily. The United States initially engaged in a naming and shaming campaign that has been largely ineffective. Some legislative efforts have also been undertaken in the U.S., such as the Cyber Intelligence Protection and Sharing Act, or CISPA. But these efforts have also been ineffective due to the political paralysis that currently stalls most legislative efforts in Congress. More recent efforts at individual prosecution, combined with diplomatic efforts to identify red lines and norms, seem more promising. In September 2015, President Barack Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping met to discuss cybersecurity. In this meeting, the U.S. laid out its position that economic espionage and the theft of intellectual property were not acceptable, nor in keeping with international norms. At the meeting, both governments agreed they would refrain from computer-enabled theft of intellectual property for commercial gain, even as President Obama suggested he might still impose sanctions if rampant Chinese hacking persisted. While China has never admitted wrongdoing, Chinese cyber espionage related to the theft of intellectual property from the United States has dropped to virtually nothing since this meeting. Olympic Games. On 17 June 2010, a Belarusian researcher discovered a new piece of malware on a client's computer. This new malware was an encrypted virus using 4 zero-day exploits. The new malware also made use of a legitimate digital certificate. The zero-day exploits gave it access to target systems, and the digital certificate convinced those systems it was a trusted piece of software. The discovery of this new malware, dubbed STUXNET, would herald a new phase in cyber conflict of state-crafted, purpose-built cyber weapons. This malware would eventually be tied to a U.S. government program dubbed Olympic Games, whose purpose appears to be the development of very sophisticated modular malware targeting Iran. In June of 2012, the New York Times reported that President Obama ordered the continuation of Bush-era cyber operations against Iran, collectively known as Olympic Games. STUXNET became the centerpiece of a broader campaign, one that might hint at the future of warfare. Olympic Games was a multi-pronged effort to sabotage Iran's nuclear enrichment program at Natanz. Thus far, STUXNET, DUQU, and Flame are all thought to be products of this program. Operation Olympic Games was a covert and still unacknowledged campaign of sabotage by means of cyber disruption directed at Iranian nuclear facilities by the United States and likely Israel. As reported, it is one of the first known uses of offensive cyber weapons. Started under the administration of U.S. President George W. Bush in 2006, Olympic Games was accelerated under President Obama, who heeded President Bush's advice to continue cyber attacks on Iran's nuclear facility at Natanz. President Bush believed that this strategy was the only way to prevent an Israeli conventional strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. STUXNET. The presumed target of the STUXNET worm was Iran's uranium enrichment program at the Natanz nuclear facility. Discovered 17 June 2010 by a Belarus technology company, VirusBlock ATA, STUXNET was designed to permanently damage Iranian uranium enrichment gas centrifuges. It was a targeted cyber weapon focused on very specific systems. STUXNET is the first known kinetic cyber weapon, a piece of malware which actually causes physical damage merely by manipulating data on the targeted systems. STUXNET is reported to have damaged or degraded 800-plus centrifuges at Iran's Natanz enrichment facility. The malware operated over a year in this facility without detection, very slowly inflicting incremental damage to affected centrifuges over the course of many months. STUXNET represents a quantum leap in malware complexity. It is a modular platform that can be repurposed for a variety of tasks based on the modular payload included. STUXNET incorporated 4 Microsoft Windows zero-day exploits. A single such exploit can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars on the open market. STUXNET also incorporated the first known rootkit specifically designed to target SCADA systems. It could also be remotely updated to change its functionality. DUQU. Discovered in October 2011, DUQU is a collection of computer malware thought to be related to the STUXNET worm. The Laboratory of Cryptography and System Security, Crisis Lab, of the Budapest University of Technology and Economics in Hungary discovered the threat, analyzed the malware, and wrote a 60-page report naming the threat DUQU. DUQU got its name from the prefix DQ it gives to the files it creates. Symantec conducted additional analysis on DUQU and believes that DUQU was created by the same authors as STUXNET, or that the authors had access to the source code of STUXNET. The worm, like DUQU, has a valid but abused digital certificate and collects information to prepare for future attacks. DUQU resembles STUXNET in 3 primary areas. The installer exploits Windows zero-day vulnerabilities, components of the malware are signed with stolen digital certificates, and both DUQU and STUXNET are highly targeted and related to Iran's nuclear program. Unlike STUXNET, DUQU is a remote access Trojan, or RAT, designed to gather intelligence on industrial infrastructure systems and steal design documents. Once DUQU steals data, it packages it into small files and exfiltrates the data out of the system. DUQU additionally has the capability to hide small files from the host operating system and disable computer security tools and antivirus software. STUXNET and DUQU are similar in that they both share the same computer programming language, modular structure, and both target Iran's nuclear program. DUQU destroys itself after 30 days of operation. Researchers believe DUQU, although discovered after STUXNET, may have been used to gather data needed for the STUXNET attack. Alternatively, DUQU could have been used to gather information for another future STUXNET-like attack. Flame. Flame, also known as Flamer or Skywiper, is modular computer malware discovered in May of 2012 by the Meher Center of the Iranian National Computer Emergency Response Team, IranCERT, Kaspersky Lab, and Crisis Lab. Flame attacks computers running the Microsoft Windows operating system and is used for targeted cyber espionage in Middle Eastern countries. Flame is considered by some to be the most sophisticated malware discovered so far. Kaspersky initially said the malware bears no resemblance to STUXNET, although it may have been a parallel project commissioned by the same attackers. After analyzing the code further, Kaspersky later said that there is a strong relationship between Flame and STUXNET. The earlier version of STUXNET contained code to propagate via USB drives that is nearly identical to a Flame module that exploits the same zero-day vulnerability. Flame appears to have been designed for intelligence gathering and can spread to other systems over local area networks or LANs, or via USB stick. Flame was capable of recording audio, keystrokes, screenshots and network traffic, Skype conversations, enabling and beaconing Bluetooth to download contact information from nearby Bluetooth-enabled devices, and exfiltrating captured data to command and control or C2 servers. Flame was also able to accept new commands from C2 servers, including a kill command to disable the malware. A network of 80 C2 servers across Asia, Europe, and North America has been discovered and is used to access the infected machines remotely. Future implications. According to the Atlantic Monthly, Operation Olympic Games is probably the most significant covert manipulation of the electromagnetic spectrum since World War II, when Polish cryptanalysis broke the Enigma cipher that allowed access to Nazi codes. The New Yorker claims Operation Olympic Games is the first formal offensive act of pure cyber sabotage by the United States against another country. Development of Olympic Games malware opened Pandora's box in a sense. Use of Olympic Games malware set precedents for the use of offensive cyber weapons against another state. It set precedent for the use of cyber weapons against critical infrastructure and SCADA systems, and it set precedents for the use of kinetic cyber attacks. The program undoubtedly accelerated Iran's cyber operations program significantly as the Iranians took to heart the lessons learned in the attack and the lack of international response to its discovery. While Olympic Games may serve as a form of deterrence for the United States, serving as a demonstration of U.S. cyber capabilities, it has also spurred other states to develop such capabilities and may have set off a covert arms race among cyber-enabled nations. Given the abilities of other actors to reverse engineer the code used in the Olympic Games malware, these attacks may prove to be problematic for the U.S. and others, since they can serve as a blueprint for new attacks and malware. SHAMOON. SHAMOON, also known as Distract, is a modular computer worm that has been used for cyber espionage in the energy sector. Its discovery was announced on 16 August 2012 by Symantec, Kaspersky Lab, and SecureAlert. Similarities have been highlighted by Kaspersky Lab and SecureAlert between SHAMOON and the Flame malware, although SHAMOON is not believed to have been created by the same malware authors as Flame. The worm hit companies within the oil and energy sectors in 2012. A group named Cutting Sword of Justice claimed responsibility for an attack on 35,000 Saudi Aramco workstations, causing the company to spend a week restoring their services. The group later indicated the SHAMOON worm had been used in the attack. Computer systems at RAS Gas were also knocked offline by unidentified malware, with some security experts attributing the damage to SHAMOON. Several goals have been suggested for the Saudi Aramco incident. These included a desire to cripple Saudi Aramco's production of oil, raising prices, and benefiting other oil-producing nations in the region, such as Iran. Some have suggested the attack was revenge against the U.S. for STUXNET by attacking an allied proxy. Some security researchers have forsaken the idea of a state-sponsored attack and suggested the SHAMOON attack on Saudi Aramco was revenge by a disgruntled employee. International context. The Middle East is one of the most conflict-prone regions in the world, with 11 interstate wars since 1945. Compounding this is the effort by Western nations to curtail Iran's nuclear ambitions. A European extension of sanctions and economic restrictions against Iran after 2012 increased pressure on Iran, who lost customers to Saudi Aramco as a result. Some have also speculated that in the aftermath of STUXNET, Iran may have decided to begin its own cyber operations program, with SHAMOON representing an early effort on their part. If the United States or Israel could use cyber weapons, why not Iran? Methodology. The SHAMOON malware was introduced into the Aramco network through the use of a USB thumb drive by a disgruntled insider. It is unknown whether this insider was connected with Iran. SHAMOON rapidly spread through 30 to 55,000 systems within the Aramco network, exfiltrated data, wiped the hard drives of these systems clean, and overwrote their master boot records. The malware had a default configuration that triggered the disk wiping payload at 8:45 p.m. local time on Thursday, November 17th. The Saudi Arabian working week runs from Sunday to Thursday. It would appear that the attack was timed to occur after most staff had gone home for the weekend, in the hope of reducing the chance of discovery before maximum damage could be caused. SHAMOON uses a number of components to infect computers. The first component is a dropper, which creates a service with the name NTSSVR to remain persistent on the infected computer. It spreads across a local network by copying itself onto other computers and will drop additional components to infected computers. The dropper comes in 32-bit and 64-bit versions. If the 32-bit version detects a 64-bit architecture, it will drop the 64-bit version. The second component is the wiper, different from the malware known as wiper, which drops a third component known as the LDOS driver. This enables access to the hard disk directly from user mode without the need of Windows APIs. The wiper uses the LDOS driver to overwrite the hard disk with photos of a Syrian boy. Impact on the target. As a result of the SHAMOON attack, 30,000 hard drives were overwritten, but not destroyed as the press reported. The hard drives in question were able to be reformatted and reused. While SHAMOON is often cited as the most devastating cyber attack on the business sector to date, this is largely hyperbole. Damage to systems, loss of confidence and reputation, labor, etc. probably totaled in the millions. However, Saudi Aramco is worth an estimated $1.2 trillion with daily operating revenues of $1 billion. A few $1,000,000 would be a drop in the bucket to a company with this type of revenue. At worst, the attack was an annoyance and it only took the company about a week to recover from the incident. Additionally, the incident was contained to Aramco's business network and did not affect oil production, the true heart of the company. Reaction by the target. Saudi Arabia has never reacted significantly to the Saudi Aramco incident. The United States engaged in some subtle naming and shaming after the incident, pointing the finger at Iran, but to date, it is still debatable whether Iran was actually responsible for the incident. While wiping 30,000 computers is not an insignificant incident, this incident is overhyped by the press and not particularly significant in the geopolitical context. Conclusions. This period of militarization in cyberspace has seen the entrance of state actors as major players in cyber conflict. Policymakers and military strategists in many states have begun to incorporate the concept of cyber conflict into operational and strategic plans. The development of purpose-built cyber weapons has the potential to seriously change the international environment. The military-industrial complex has already responded with the creation of a number of pure cyber defense contractors specializing in cyber weapons and information dominance. While state-sponsored incidents are on the rise, they remain mostly espionage-focused low-level events with rare exceptions. Most are over-exaggerated by media, scholar, and pundits. Contrary to the description of cyber attacks as lightning quick, these operations seem to span long periods of time. This implies a great deal of preparation before use. This is Professor Scott Applegate. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson on state actors in cyber conflict. Please feel free to contact me if you have any specific questions in regards to this lecture.